All right, let's go. So next up, everyone, we are going to look at the linear elements, right? Because if you recall from that assignment, we had planar and we had linear elements, right? So the linear elements were more like the structure and basis upon which we started to hang or mount the surface elements, or at least that was kind of the idea. The only difference now is that we're going to have less rules, and it's going to be purely isolated to kind of alignments and linearities and stuff like that. But anyway, so let's kind of think through what the possibilities could be. Essentially, this is where you as the designer need to establish what rules there are going to be. Okay, and I'm going to introduce probably the simplest possible rule that I could ever think of for something like this is to basically have 3 lines that match the length of one of the sides of each of these squares, right? So you have 3 squares of various sizes, you have 3 lines of various sizes that correspond with the length of the side of the square. It's absolutely the easiest thing you could possibly think of. So layer 3, I'm going to rename this to lines. And then we're going to actually switch to the line. Let's see. How do I get the color picker to pick a line?
Oh, I don't know.
I think it's always going to pick fill, won't it? Hang on. Color picker, right click it.
You're talking about the stroke?
Using the eyedropper tool, like if I pick a color, it's going to pick fill, but I want it to pick the line.
You can just go down there and switch it right here. The little arrow.
That guy?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. There we go. I don't use these enough. Anyway, there we go. Perfect. Okay, so let me pick a different color for this one. Okay, so I'm going to jump into the warm gray or brownish color that I actually pulled from my palette. Not actually from my grays yet. Okay, but I pulled this one from my palette. So the first thing I'm going to do is grab the line tool, and we're going to have to look at the nature of these actual tools here in quite some detail. So let me just draw a line real fast from one edge. Actually, I'll start it. Delete that. I'm going to start it from the left-hand side and go all the way down there. Make sure that it says anchor when you're on the edge there. It's kind of like your AutoCAD or Rhino object snap. And it won't necessarily show anything, but the line will be green here. But that means that there's an invisible line that's selected, and I don't have any properties to give it an actual color yet. So let me go back down to that eyedropper. I'm going to pick, switch it. There we go. And so that one gave it some actual, oh, I picked the wrong color. Darn. There we go. So that actually gave it a color, but now it's really thin. So let's zoom in and see what that looks like. Zoom in, zoom in, zoom in, zoom in. Keep zooming in. And that's what we finally get. Okay? So clearly a 1-point line is extremely small. Okay? So you'll get used to what size lines you need for different applications, but really what we're going to be looking at here is something that actually has a lot of meat. So right off the bat, you're probably going to want to bump this up to a very high number, even something like a 10, or potentially even a 20 or a 40 line. So let's go with 40. All right, and I want to show you just some of the properties of this line type tool that you should be aware of before you actually go through this exercise. I did show you before the stroke menu, if you recall, but I did not show you these cap and corner conditions. The cap and corner conditions are important because they will create basically like a graphic extension on the end of the actual point at which your line stops. So if I switch it to a round cap, you'll see that it actually extends beyond the geometry, right? Because it just creates basically a circle at the end, and then, you know, yeah. So the square cap will do the same thing. So if I select that and switch it to projecting cap, that's doing exactly the same thing. It's just not rounded. So be careful of that because this is a very precise exercise. So we don't really want to have geometry that's extending beyond, right? Because this is going to be, you know, bounded by certain things. So we want to make sure that our cap is set to a butt cap. Okay, so jumping a little bit forward here then, we need to actually establish that rule set. So I mentioned that these lines are going to match exactly. I can basically just grab this at this point and make this one shorter. Hold Shift to make sure it's going in line, and then you'll see that the green line will actually align to the bottom of this geometry. So that's how you know that you're actually snapping to the exact length of that item. It says Intersect there. You can barely see it on the projector screen, but it does say Intersect. So you click, hold Shift, drag it down.
I think I did something.
Okay, that's possible. So one last thing here before I make sure that you're all caught up with me and we move on is that the logic that I used for reducing the size of the line now is going to obviously have to get a little bit, I need to infuse another step upon it, you know, for structural reasons, right? The smaller elements are typically going to be not quite as large, right? Maybe in some cases. So I'm going to reduce the actual size of these lines as well. So this is actually going to start, I'm going to start mine from 60 up there, and this will stay a 40, and then this one will go down to a 20.
Wait, how did you drag those lines down? You shift, pull, click, what?
How did I draw the line?
Like how you pulled that one line and you brought it down.
I wish the guide was not green so that you could see it a little better. But basically, let me kind of, see how you have that green line there?
Uh-huh.
That's like your object snap. And when you click, it'll lock it to be aligned to that item.
Oh, you just drew a new line.
Yeah,
Oh,
I clicked, and then I held Shift, and then I aligned it to the bottom of it, and that's what created it.
So your line, your line thickness going from 60, 40, 10?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Any questions so far? Yes. How do you get them on a different layer? I started on a different layer, but if you did not start on a different layer, it's going to look like this. You have line, line, line. It's going to be on the squares layer. So it looks like that, right? It's on the same layer as your squares?
I don't even have that. I just have the squares. I couldn't figure out how to move the squares in a different layer.
Oh, okay. I'll come troubleshoot it with you. But anyway, if you need to switch items to a different layer, then I'll recap. You just go to Lines, right-click it, Arrange, Send to Current Layer. Okay. But you can't have anything that is on the Lines layer in your selection at the time. Okay, that's something you're all just going to have to get used to. Any questions? All right, let me stop this video and then we'll move into actual composition stuff.